the starting point of your journey in my head is jumping into your company's family when it's a company family business, when it's at 8 million and growing it to 45 million global enterprise. Tell me how you got to the point of jumping in, what experience you had to jump in and take over the business and what you did to grow it.
Yeah. So I started, in high school and college, working summer breaks and spring breaks and things like that, just working in the business. My wife and I started dating at 15, so I needed money for my girlfriend. So I needed a job. And so I worked in the business, but really enjoyed it. And there was in all honesty, and I think I mentioned this in my first book, but there was a point in time in college, I was really fascinated by anatomy and physiology and thought about possibly going into medicine and possibly being an orthopedic surgeon or something like that. But in all honesty, when I looked at the path it would take to do that versus I can go party and have fun in college and go into the family business, that was really the easier, more logical route. I mentioned my wife earlier. We got married at 22, right out of college, and we had a management change at our manufacturing facility in Virginia. We lived in North Carolina at the time, which is where our sales offices were. We manufactured hardwood veneer, and so we decided we didn't have kids yet. We moved to Virginia, and I got involved in the manufacturing part of the business, which I fell in love with. But by that time it was the late 90s. And that was a time where a lot of the furniture manufacturers were moving offshore. So when I first started, most of our customers were big furniture manufacturers, and they were in North Carolina and Virginia. So we were right in their back door. When they started all moving to Asia, we had to reinvent ourselves and become more of an export business versus a purely domestic business. And so that started the process. And then one of the things that I started to realize, sourcing the raw material was a big challenge for us. So I wanted to vertically integrate the business and get closer to the raw material so we had more control over that. And that's when I brought on this business partner who had a background in timber merchandising. And so part of that vertical integration, we set up a subsidiary company that he was the managing director of. And we began buying standing timber, managing all of that. And as we would harvest timber, he would merchandise through the company he was running all of the logs that we did not want to produce into veneer. And then we would keep the best logs to produce for ourselves. So that's kind of the vertical integration that led us into lots of export markets. Yeah.
So you went from manufacturing, were you manufacturing the basics of furniture at that point and selling them to furniture companies?
No, thank you. So in hardwood, in furniture that's finished with hardwood veneer, the veneer that we would produce is the higher end face grade veneer that goes on the surface. It would be laminated to plywood or other oriented strand board or other substrates. And then that would be used. So imagine like if you go into your kitchen and you look at the end panels on your kitchen cabinets, those are likely panels that are covered in veneer, and inside those panels is plywood. So we took hardwood logs, and our manufacturing process actually sliced the sheets of veneer. And so we were slicing sheets anywhere from 1/50th to 1/42nd of an inch thick. Then we were selling that product to companies that would then use that to make furniture, to finish the surfaces of their furniture.
Crazy. Okay. So you're slicing logs into tiny pieces, right, selling them to people that are manufacturing furniture.
Correct.
Right. And then you decided that you wanted to vertically integrate to go get the trees and cut the trees down and get the logs.
Right. To give us more control over our raw material inputs.
Okay. So this is, vertical integration, super common amongst businesses, specifically manufacturing, but tons of businesses. Also, somewhat crazy because I imagine you had not been chopping down trees in your past so far.
Right. And that was an area that was not an expertise of ours, which is why I brought on a partner who had expertise there, who ended up being the partner that I became best friends with, that ended up embezzling over $500,000, that ended up committing bank fraud. And both businesses were working with the same lender. So when we discovered his fraud and embezzlement and went to the U.S. Attorney's office and to the bank with that information, the bank immediately froze all accounts in both companies because they needed to protect themselves and figure out what the heck was going on. And that started to lead us down that whole path, this was in November of '08. So for those of you who remember that housing market collapse, it was kind of the summer of '08 was when the first pains of that started to hit. And so we were going through this right as it was starting to really, really unravel.
Wow. So I want to ask some questions about that situation. But first, why don't you tell me kind of where that led? So the '08 housing collapse was the underpinning of that collapse was a super messy financial market, right? So all the banks are in dire straits. Some got bailed out, many collapsed. So for this to happen as that's happening would explain the banks being freaked out and not
Sure.
being very compassionate
Right.
or having options for that matter.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because the way I got through that was pretty fascinating. And this is what I wrote about in my first book, Rise, that came out in 2017. But when we discovered all of this on the manufacturing side of the business that I was running, about a year and a half prior, we had taken out a $6 million term note with the same lender to add some new equipment, expand the factory, because in '06, '07, the economy was cranking. Things were great. And so we were building to increase our capacity. The dynamics of all of this, my father had passed. He passed in 2003. My mother she was part of the company when we took out the term note. But between that time and when this collapse happened, we had transacted her out of the business as part of our estate planning. So when this happened, she was hung on the guarantee of the term note, but no longer had equity in the company that she was stuck on the note for. So my mother, father's passed, my wife and I and my mother are on this guarantee, and we find out that my business partner has been committing bank fraud. So I had to figure out, number one, how to try to avoid bankruptcy because I didn't want them going after my mother. I didn't want to put her in that position. And I, of course, didn't want my wife and I having to deal with that. So because of the chaos the banks were dealing with, I went to the special assets group, and with all the brand new equipment we had bought, if they had forced bankruptcy and auctioned us off, they would have gotten nothing, literally nothing, because our industry was so small, the equipment was so expensive. So I offered if they would give me just enough liquidity to keep the doors open, I would stay on board and unwind the business over time for their benefit. And while I couldn't guarantee what we could do with that, it would definitely be better than bankruptcy. And I think because of the chaos they were dealing with at the time, we were viewed as one less fire to fight. So they allowed us to kick the can down the road. And it took about 18 months, and I had some incredibly fortunate breaks. I had luck on my side for a little while and was able to get the bank and the creditors made whole. My wife and I took the haircut. But I spent 18 months meeting twice a month with the special assets group of SunTrust Bank, which is now part of Truist. And that was it was a painful lesson dealing with special assets, but it was an incredible lesson in terms of what I learned and went through that.
You know, I would say like one of the immediate lessons that's relevant for entrepreneurs is there's always a negotiation to be had. And
Yes.
sometimes people think that, you know, a huge corporate bank, you can't talk to them, you can't negotiate. But the fact is in life, there is a human at the other end of everything. And
Right.
so there's a win-lose for everybody. And so the question is, what's the lever? And you have a negotiation to have.
Yeah, lever's the right word, right? I like to say leverage is a great thing to have and not need to use. You know, and so I was in a situation where we didn't have much leverage, but what I was able to find was kind of that one lever that we owed the bank enough money that if they wrote basically the whole thing off, it was going to hurt. And because of the amount of chaos they had going on, my leverage was if I can remove from them one more fire to have to deal with, then that may give me a pathway. And at the same time, because this guy was my business partner, you know, the first 24 hours, everybody thinks, okay, everybody that's involved is in trouble here. And so through the efforts we made, and like one of the very first things we did is we hired a gentleman who was a former FBI forensic accountant. He spent 20 years in the Bureau and was now doing private forensic accounting investigations. He came on board and spent 3 days working with my CFO. So the day that we did go to the bank in the special assets group, I had a retired FBI forensic accountant on my side. We had our legal team there, and we were very quickly able to make it clear and get the bank and the U.S. Attorney's Office on board that I had also been duped and defrauded in all of this. And so they quickly got to a point where they realized that I was on the right side of this. I was working to try to help them, cooperating in all the investigation and helping the bank try to recover as much as they could. And so I think it's one, what are your points of leverage, but also, really trying to do the right things for the right reasons and trust that in time, while that may be difficult in the short term, it does often work in the long term.
Yeah, I love that. I think that my personal experience has been that when you focus on the return on relationship, even when it's in a very difficult situation and it looks like you're going to lose your ass as a result, focusing on the relationship as opposed to the finances often yield a better result.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? You said it earlier. There's a human on every side of every transaction, and we are emotional creatures. We're relational creatures, and there's something powerful at play there.
Yep. And sometimes the benefit happens in the short run, and sometimes it's a very long horizon.
Right.
When you play the return on relationship game, but for most of us, life is long, and there are a lot of cycles of life, a lot of lessons to learn, a lot of chapters, and people show up again.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, where that left us was when we started the new business in the wake of all of this, we were able to maintain our home. So we sold our home. We moved to Ohio because there was a contract manufacturer. So we started to outsource our production. But we were able to save our home and move into an apartment and take that equity and use that to restart a business. Also, because we had avoided bankruptcy, my credit had not been affected. So we were able to get a small business loan. We got a $100,000 line of credit, and we're able to restart. We were able to pull together enough capital to start a new business.
That's big. Well, speaking of return on relationships, the other side of this is you have who was your best friend, business partner, committed fraud.
Yeah.
And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is fraud that put him in jail?
Took 4 years for him to finally be prosecuted, but the wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind very fine. And so he did spend 2 years of a 2.5-year sentence in federal prison as a result.
Yeah, I wanted to put a point on that because people throw terms like fraud around, and there's a difference between, some sloppy bookkeeping and even malicious intent and prosecution and landing in federal prison as a result of your actions.